This is Pat Salver, broadcasting with Health Innovation Media from Health 2.0. It's my pleasure today to have with me, and I'm going to probably blow the name, but I'm going to make an attempt anyway, Nick van der Heyden. Did I get it?
Absolutely.
So he's Dutch, and I don't have much of a Dutch accent, but he's given me permission to call him Dr. Nick because, Nick, you are a emergency physician, you're a family doc. What's your background?
So last time I practiced clinical medicine, it was ED when I was doing double duty. And because of the problems that people had with my last name, I ended up being called Dr. Nick, and that became my moniker online. So I'm Dr. Nick 1 on Twitter as well. So.
Well, that's great. We haven't been promoting Twitter handles, but we're happy to do that at Dr. Nick 1. And I understand that you also are big into media and you have a podcast of your own. You want to tell us a little bit about that before
Absolutely.
we move
on? Lucky enough to snap up Voice of the Doctor. So I have a regular blog. It's tied to obviously my company and voice being a sort of fundamental component of communication. And that's also a regular podcast with interviews very similar to these. So I've done the same thing, but not so much in video, although that's one of the new explorations that I think is interesting on the site.
Good, great. Well, you mentioned that communication is a part of your company, and the company that Nick is working for is really, one of the amazing companies that's around, not totally focused on healthcare, but about half your business is healthcare, and the name of the company is Nuance Communications. And when I first heard of Nuance earlier this year, I knew your products. I knew about voice recognition, but I kind of didn't tie it to Nuance. I mean, it was really interesting to me to be able to talk to people from your company and find out all the amazing things you're doing. So you told me about a bunch of products that are relevant to healthcare. I think I'm going to turn it over to you and let you help everybody listening understand what is Nuance and how does it help their life, and why don't they know the name?
So I think that's one of our problems, is that we're one of the most widely used technologies, but least well known. We touch many people's lives. If you drive in your car and you use speech recognition, you're pretty much using our stuff. If you're calling on the phone and talking to the airline automated system, you're using our stuff. Is
Siri Nuance?
Siri is a part of a group of products, the automated interactions. We have our own solution that carries out the same kind of task.
You have Florence, right?
Florence is our sort of prototype and innovation to show people how to use it. And that's what I was showing at Health 2.0, in fact. So you're right, not as well known as we would like. I think we're embedded, we're the enabler, and not everybody knows that they're using it. And sometimes that's fine. As you say, more often than not, people discover and say, "Oh, you're the dragon people." That's probably
exactly.
the biggest.
That's what I was going to say. You're the dragon
brand,
people.
And a highly successful brand both in healthcare but also outside. And that's been the sort of core technology. So we allow people to capture information using their voice. Our belief is that voice is one of the most efficient means of communication. That's what we're using here. And from a clinician standpoint, what am I interested in when I talk to a patient? What are you interested in? You're interested in the narrative, not so much the discrete data, but the detail. I read the history of presenting illness and the medical decision making. And that tells me everything about what happened with your engagement, and I might look at some lab results and your examination and so forth. So we capture that and we do it in an automated way using your voice. We did it historically using a back-end process so that people could capture. It went off to a back-end processing engine, replaced the transcriptionist or augmented the transcriptionist, and then brings it back for review. And we've transitioned into this real-time activity that everybody's familiar with. We pull out our phones, we've got speech recognition on our laptops, it's all real-time, and the difference is essentially the time delay has gone. And now we've layered on top of that natural language processing, knowledge-based understanding of documentation improvement and coding, so that we can bring all of that knowledge to the point of documentation, which from a clinician standpoint is the point that you want that information, versus what typically happens is we might extract it, find it a little bit later, and then what happens is we're reporting on something that we didn't do or we missed or we have to be asked questions. I think pretty much 100% of clinicians tell me that if you ask me now, whilst I'm talking to the patient, I'm going to be able to answer the question, or not. If you ask me in 5 minutes, 5 hours, or even 5 days later.
Right, because that's 5 patients, 25 patients,
Exactly,
105 patients
all
later.
the patients
right.
in between. The reactivation energy of that is very challenging. So we're trying to bring all of that to the point of care or the point of documentation, which should be one and the same thing, because that's the most accurate place or the most accurate way of rendering the patient's clinical notes, doing it at the time that we're treating the patient.
Right. Well, so it's interesting. I mentioned to you that my son's a radiologist, and one of the perks he gets is that he can do imaging on his family members for free. So I was back in Boise where he practiced, and had a problem with my thumbs, which is because I wasn't using voice recognition enough. I was doing this old-fashioned typing, and I had him take an X-ray of my hands, and then he proceeded to dictate his note real time, and as he's dictating it, it's typing on the screen. You can see if there were any typos and errors made, and fix them right on the spot. And you said to me, "Well, that was probably Nuance."
Oh, I'm almost 100% certain it is. We really that was the trial balloon, and it was for a number of very good reasons. Radiology is this quiet space. It tends to be focused on images versus the patient.
And standard language.
Right, very consistent language. So everything, it was the confluence of all these things made it the most appropriate place to test it and trial it. And there was initial resistance, and I've got to read it, but we perfected it there. And I think what's interesting is that it's expanded far beyond that. But we always revert back and we sort of innovate in that space because it's most well suited. What's important for speech recognition? High quality audio. With lots of noise, it makes it much harder. You don't get noise in a radiology reporting room typically.
Yeah.
So
it's quiet and it's dark.
Exactly. Been a great place to sort of innovate, create new techniques. So by way of an example, some of the latest things that we've brought to that brings NLP to bear, called Assure.
Wait. I have to stop you.
Sure.
NLP, natural language processing. You mentioned it before, and I just want to be sure everybody understands what NLP is.
So natural language processing, we call clinical language understanding, is the ability to understand the intent or the content in the context, in our case, in medicine. So when I say myocardial infarction versus MI versus heart attack, that all relates back to the same term or code, so we can reference it back. And I understand...
You have to manually build up a database that says MI equals myocardial infarction equals heart attack?
So historically, that's how NLP worked. It was a sort of manual rules-based process. We've now sort of augmented that. We use a combination, uniquely, I think, of a statistical-based approach that says let's pour in lots of data and find those associations, and augment it with the rules-based so that we can start to refine it. And what we've seen is the accuracy of that go up so much quicker. It's this exponential curve. So we use that, and in the context of radiology. Some people sort of say, well, you wouldn't expect this, but there's discrepancies in report, even within a report, of laterality. You might be dictating on the left and suddenly refer to the right, and you go, well, why would you do that? Look at your son. He might not have been disturbed because he was, focus for him was mom, so he was paying attention.
Mom standing there making sure he's dictating correctly.
Exactly. But in most busy radiology settings, there's people coming in, I've got a hot seat report, or could you go and give some contrast to this patient? You come back and your context is shifted, but the report on the screen hasn't. So we use NLP to analyze for laterality, anatomy, inconsistencies.
So if I got disrupted, let me interrupt you for a second. So I got disrupted, like I just did to you.
Yes.
And I was talking about, the left hand.
Yep.
And now I kind of forget because I was disrupted, and I come back and say, right, will the Nuance software say, correct me?
Absolutely. So what it does is it analyzes the report when you finish, and it will, and there's variations on a theme as to how, depending on the error or the content, but it's going to pop up an alert or some notification to say, hey, there's something here that I think you want to pay attention to. And it will identify that laterality in anatomy. If I know I'm dealing with a male patient and I talk about female anatomy, And it
So
seems
it's a good way of preventing certain kinds of medical errors.
Exactly.
Wow.
And included in that, one of the sort of value propositions is, one of the things that we do in radiology, your son will tell you, is he's at the front line of identifying critical clinical information.
Right.
You know, patient has a pulmonary thromboembolus. Well, that's urgent. We need to let people know. The problem is it's in the text or the narrative of the report. We can identify that and produce the alert and allow him to then push out.
So
the
it could, the
information.
NLP, the natural language processing, will read through, I'm making
Yeah.
it into a human being, but
Yeah,
it'll be reading
it's
through the
exactly
report, and it'll hit, pulmonary embolism, that's urgent.
Right.
Sends
Highlight
up
it
an alert.
and link it to whatever system you have. So the key is, in the narrative it was locked away until somebody read it and says, oh my goodness, we've got a pulmonary embolus,
Right.
we have to do something. Now we're saying the technology is going to sit behind. It's like having somebody sitting behind you going, did you notice? Hey, you've got to do something about that.
And by the way, I'm thinking about the radiology report. So as an emergency physician as well,
Mhm.
one of the things we were always waiting for was to get that report. I've got the sick person in front of me, but I'm waiting for the radiologist to
Right.
come and give me, the reading.
Yeah.
If that alert could actually go not just to the radiologist, but also out to me,
Right.
maybe I have to call up and confirm it with the radiologist, but at least I could start thinking, okay, that's what I have to deal with. Let me,
Right.
start moving down the path towards whatever intervention it is that I'm going to do that could be, life-saving in certain circumstances.
It's not just the element of, the FedEx society that we live in, where we want all this instant information. In medicine, it's important. It's important to get people in, treated, and out quickly, because that's better healthcare for the most part.
Right.
And, making that report instantly available versus waiting a day or, hours is absolutely valuable. But the hidden benefit to that clinicians and radiologists are a good case in point. One of the regions that I think they're definitely in the 90s in terms of adoption of this technology, is that what used to happen was I'd do the report, go somewhere, and at some point would then be available. But the people that had the test done knew, the physician, the referring physician, and people dependent on that report, and they'd call me up. So I have all this disruptive activity of, hey, did you see that patient? Oh, yes, yeah, let me look. Oh, that was so-and-so. Now, if the report's instantly available, suddenly all those telephones, pages disappear, and my consumers of that information, the referring physician, the patients, all know that it's there, and instead of calling me, they go and look at it in the system, it's there, it's instantly available. Sudden, huge efficiency, and I can focus on my task at hand, which is reading the report.
Yeah, I mean, it's really an amazing contribution. You were also talking about, you had several other kind of product lines that you were talking
Mhm.
about. One of them was coding, kind of I'm not sure I'm going to say it right, but an automated coding. Can you tell us a
Absolutely.
little bit about that?
So, from a documentation perspective, I think Nuance we've got 500,000 physicians using our technology. So we pretty much know everything, or a lot of what's going on at the front end of capturing that information. But what happens to it? So from a clinician standpoint, I'm interested in care and so forth. But downstream, we have to bill for it, and billing is tied to codes, and that coding process is predominantly manual. There's been a move, particularly with ICD-10, to try and automate that using technology.
Right, but there's still these rooms full of coders that are trying to
Absolutely.
decipher my note if I'm still handwriting it, God forbid,
Right.
or make sense out of what I've typed into an electronic record or dictated.
Right, exactly. And even today, what you see is the same as you saw with dictation, with this offshoring movement to try and reduce the cost. But the obvious next step is to automate that. Natural language processing, clinical language understanding, understands what you says, or what you say, and is contained in your note, understands that a past history of myocardial infarction is not the same as I suspect myocardial infarction. All that sort of,
Right.
teasing out the details, and allows you to generate automatically codes appropriately from the billing, from an ICD-9 today, and then ICD-10 in the future coding perspective. And what we then pass on to the coders is, instead of here's the pile's there, but we automate the extraction of those codes and give them the links back to that information for
So you do kind of a
them to validate.
confirmatory?
Yeah, so then they become far more efficient. They can see and review many more cases. We aggregate the information appropriately, and you can automate the vast majority of that and leave the complex cases that require much more understanding and detail to those individuals who are already in very high demand and in very short supply. So we're applying technology, improve the efficiency, and allow you to produce those codes automatically. But here's the brilliant part. Now, I as a clinician, I've heard clinicians say, I don't care about codes, don't show me codes, I'm not interested. And that's a little bit extreme, but the reality is I'm not interested in the code so much as the quality of care. Codes represent quality, and what we do is we tie all of that back to the point of documentation and give feedback to the clinician that says, hey, I analyzed your note and I see that you didn't mention this clinical condition, although I see this constellation of symptoms that adds up to respiratory failure, for instance. If I don't mention it, the billers don't get it. But from a documentation standpoint, I want to document that because I'm now justifying that my case is more complex than the other physician who sees a simpler case. So that when we're comparing, as we're seeing, and we see that at Health 2.0, this sort of, aggregation of data and comparison, people are going to be shopping. I want to compare apples with apples. That's important to me, and it allows me to justify the more expensive care, the more detailed care, perhaps the more expensive antibiotics, and maybe antibiotics that have more risks associated with them. And I put that all into my documentation by being prompted. It's not that I didn't know it, I just didn't know I was required to enter the information. So the clinicians get the value, but downstream we're doing all the value proposition for the coders as well. So it's a win-win for both.
But there's also an incredible, as I listened to this, so I spent 15 years working for health insurers, and we tried to manage care, but we were trying to manage care off of claims data with all of its flaws. So as I listened to you talk about not only if we ever get ICD-10 implemented, but I add ICD-10 to this kind of improvement in coding through all the processes that you talked about.
Right.
And now as a physician working for a health insurance company, I might have clinical data that I could really design programs around.
Absolutely.
As opposed to clinical data or coding data that was really designed oftentimes to optimize reimbursement,
right,
as opposed to tell the story of what really happened clinically. So this really seems like a fantastic breakthrough to me.
It is, and I think it's clearly on the pathway of moving us towards value payments for delivering high quality care versus paying me to do things or to do stuff. So now I can discern what people are doing. I don't have to focus so much on, hey, how many procedures did you do? And
Right.
and that's where we want to be. I mean, I as a physician don't come in saying, I want to do this number of procedures, but that's how I'm measured, so I'm inevitably incentivized to do that. So we're clearly on the pathway to say, let's show the value of this care that I'm delivering by extracting the clinical details so that I can show patient came in this way, goes out better, I've delivered high quality care. Pay me for that versus paying to do it.
So you're making a big contribution to our shift from fee for service,
Right.
Pay me for things, to pay me for outcomes, and that's fantastic. So I want to thank you very much. This has been a really informative half hour, and I want to continue to follow Nuance and learn all the new things that you're bringing to the big data scene.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll wrap with that. So this is Pat Salber with Health Innovation Media, just having had the pleasure of spending a half hour talking to the Chief Medical Information Officer, CMIO, of Nuance Communications. And I'm going to call him Dr. Nick, even though his name is Nick van der Heyden. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.